You really think you can cook? Chef Victor Langley asked, and the laughter that followed was exactly what he wanted. He stood beneath the warm amber lights of Bellamy House, one of Boston's most celebrated restaurants, holding a silver fork like a judge preparing to deliver a verdict. Across from him stood Emily Carter, 25, quiet, pale-skinned, dressed in a plain white blouse and the inexpensive black apron worn by the restaurant's support staff. No embroidered chef's coat. No prestigious culinary school insignia. Nothing about her suggested she belonged anywhere near the center of that dining room. Victor had spent 20 years making sure people knew his name. Magazine covers hung near the entrance. Photographs of him beside politicians, actors, and famous restaurateurs lined the hallway outside the kitchen. Tonight, surrounded by wealthy guests and an open kitchen full of nervous employees, he believed he was about to teach one insignificant young woman a lesson about knowing her place. He had no idea the lesson would be his. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. Now, back to Emily. A few minutes earlier, Victor had loudly announced that Emily apparently believed she could improve one of his dishes. The comment had earned amused smiles around the room. So Victor decided to entertain them. He gave Emily a handful of ordinary ingredients and told her to cook. Now the finished plate rested between them. It looked almost too simple. No towers of microgreens. No gold leaf. No theatrical cloud of smoke. Just carefully browned vegetables, a modest piece of fish, and a sauce whose deep amber surface caught the chandelier light. Victor smirked. That's it? Someone near the open kitchen chuckled. Emily said nothing. Her hands rested loosely at her sides. Her blonde hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and although dozens of eyes were fixed on her, she didn't shrink beneath them. Her eyes remained steady. Victor cut a small piece of fish, dragged it through the sauce, and lifted it toward his mouth. Watch carefully, he told his staff. This is why enthusiasm is not the same thing as training. More laughter. Emily looked at the fork. Not at Victor. The fork. As if she already knew what was about to happen. Victor took the bite. He chewed once. Then twice. And stopped. The amusement disappeared from his face so quickly that Daniel Brooks, watching from the kitchen doorway, straightened. Victor stared down at the plate. A wineglass touched a table somewhere behind him. Then nothing. He took another bite, larger this time. Emily still hadn't moved. Victor's brow tightened. The fork remained suspended between his fingers while something unfamiliar passed across his expression, not disgust, not confusion. Recognition. At a nearby table, Margaret Whitmore slowly lowered her napkin. She had been watching casually before. Now she was staring at Emily. Victor swallowed. For the first time that evening, Boston's famous chef Victor Langley seemed unable to find a clever thing to say. And that silence was beginning to spread. But to understand why one ordinary bite could strip the arrogance from a man who had built his career on being the best person in every kitchen, you have to go back 6 hours, to the moment Emily Carter entered Bellamy House through the back door. Because Victor had already seen her that afternoon. He simply hadn't considered her worth remembering. 6 hours earlier, Emily Carter had entered Bellamy House through a narrow service door that most guests never knew existed. Outside, Boston moved beneath a gray afternoon sky. Inside, the restaurant was already transforming itself for the evening. Copper pans gleamed beneath white lights. Knives struck cutting boards in quick rhythms. Stock simmered in steel pots while cooks moved between stations with the controlled urgency of people preparing for war. Emily stepped quietly into that world. "Morning, Emily," Daniel Brooks called from the vegetable station. Afternoon, she corrected softly. Daniel glanced at the clock and laughed. Right. Feels like morning when you've been here since 8. Emily smiled and tied on a plain black apron. At 25, she looked younger when she wore her blonde hair in a simple ponytail. There was nothing theatrical about her. No expensive knife roll. No tattoos of herbs or flames climbing her arms. No stories about Paris, Copenhagen, or some legendary culinary school. For 3 weeks, she had worked wherever Bellamy House needed her. Washing produce. Organizing deliveries. Peeling vegetables. Cleaning stations. Most of the kitchen barely noticed her. Chef Victor Langley certainly didn't. He swept through the kitchen minutes later in an immaculate white coat, checking preparations for that evening's tasting menu. Sauce. A cook immediately handed him a spoon. Victor tasted, frowned, and continued walking. Emily, passing behind the station with a crate of herbs, stopped. Her nose twitched almost imperceptibly. She looked toward the saucepan. Your heat's too high, she murmured. The young cook blinked. What? The butter's about to separate. He looked down. The sauce appeared perfectly smooth. Then, seconds later, a thin oily sheen formed around the edge. His eyes widened. Emily had already walked away. Daniel saw the whole thing. 20 minutes later, he saw something else. Emily was sorting herbs when she suddenly removed a small bundle of tarragon from a container. This shouldn't be here. Daniel inspected it. Looks fine. Emily broke one leaf between her fingers and held it toward him. He smelled it. His expression changed. Refrigerator burn? She nodded. It'll turn bitter under heat. Daniel stared at her. How did you catch that? Emily shrugged. You smell enough herbs, you remember them. It was an answer that explained nothing. Near 4 o'clock, the staff gathered briefly for family meal. Someone had made a simple chicken stew, and complaints began almost immediately. Need salt. Need something. While everyone argued, Emily quietly crossed to the pot after they dispersed. A pinch of salt. A little acid. 1 spoonful of something Daniel couldn't see. She stirred once and walked away. Minutes later, Victor himself passed the pot, tasted it, and stopped. Who fixed this? Nobody answered. Victor took another spoonful. Much better. Emily kept slicing onions. Daniel looked from Victor to her. She never raised her head. That was when he noticed the knife. Not the knife itself, it was cheap, restaurant-issued steel. It was her hand. The blade moved through the onion with effortless precision, each slice nearly identical, her fingers positioned with the unconscious discipline of someone who had repeated the motion thousands of times. Daniel leaned against the counter. Emily. She stopped. Where did you learn to cut like that? For the first time all afternoon, something guarded appeared behind her eyes. Here and there. Before Daniel could ask another question, Victor's voice thundered across the kitchen. Everyone listen up. The room snapped to attention. Victor stood beneath the bright pass lights, his expression severe. Tonight matters. No improvising. No mistakes. And nobody does anything they weren't hired to do. His gaze swept across the staff. For half a second, it passed over Emily. Then moved on. She lowered her eyes and returned to the onions. Daniel watched her carefully. Victor Langley had just looked directly at the most interesting person in his kitchen. And, like everyone else, he had seen only an ordinary girl. By 5:30, Bellamy House no longer felt like a restaurant preparing for dinner. It felt like a stage waiting for its star. Candles flickered against polished glass. White linen covered every table without a wrinkle. Beyond the open kitchen, servers adjusted silverware by fractions of an inch while the first black cars began arriving beneath the awning outside. And at the center of it all stood Victor Langley. He had built his reputation carefully. 20 years earlier, Victor had been another ambitious line cook working 14-hour shifts. Now his photograph appeared in culinary magazines, television producers called for interviews, and wealthy diners waited months for reservations. He had earned much of that success. That was precisely what made his arrogance so dangerous. Victor knew food. He understood temperature by sound, could detect an unbalanced sauce almost instantly, and demanded discipline because he believed excellence required it. But somewhere between his first award and his latest television appearance, confidence had hardened into something colder. He no longer simply recognized talent. He believed he could recognize who deserved to possess it. Table 12 is Margaret Whitmore, Victor told the staff during final briefing. She has eaten in every important restaurant from New York to Lyon. Do not make her ask twice for anything. His finger moved down the reservation sheet. Table 7 includes 2 investors. Table 9 has a food columnist. The cooks exchanged nervous glances. Victor noticed. "Good," he said. "You should be nervous." Emily stood near the back with a container of cleaned vegetables against her hip. Victor's gaze passed over her. "You." Emily looked up. "Stay out of the main line once service starts." "Yes, chef." "Your support staff." "Support." His emphasis made several cooks glance toward her. Emily simply nodded. Victor turned away. Daniel's jaw tightened. Minutes later, service began. Orders appeared. Pans hissed. Servers moved through swinging doors carrying plates arranged with mathematical precision. Victor controlled the pass like a conductor. 2 halibut. "Yes, chef." "Sauce on 6. "Yes, chef." "Where is my garnish?" His voice cut through every competing sound. Then a photographer appeared near the kitchen entrance. Victor changed almost instantly. His shoulders straightened. His anger vanished behind a polished smile as he positioned himself beside a finished plate. Flash. Flash. Emily watched from the prep counter. Daniel leaned closer. "He loves cameras." Emily continued trimming vegetables. "Some people do. You don't." Her knife paused for half a second. "No." There was something in the answer that made Daniel look at her again. Before he could respond, Victor erupted. "Who plated this?" "A young cook named Mason froze." Victor held up a plate. "The puree is touching the protein." "Chef, I thought." "That's the problem." "You thought." The kitchen fell quiet. Victor scraped the plate into the trash. Again. Mason's face burned. Emily lowered her eyes, but her expression changed. Not fear. Recognition. She had seen kitchens like this before, places where perfection slowly became an excuse for humiliation. Victor noticed her looking. "Something amusing, Emily?" "No, chef." "Then work." She did. Yet pressure continued building. More guests arrived. More tickets spilled from the printer. Victor's commands became sharper as the dining room filled with people whose opinions mattered to him. Then Daniel tasted the sauce for the evening's signature fish course. His face tightened. He tasted again. Something was wrong. Victor approached. "What?" Daniel hesitated. "The sauce is turning bitter." Victor seized a spoon. One taste erased the color from his face. 42 portions were due within minutes. Behind him, nobody moved. Then, from the prep station, Emily looked toward the saucepan. She already knew what had happened. And against every instinct telling her to remain invisible, she quietly said, "The sauce isn't the problem." Victor slowly turned. For the first time that evening, he truly looked at her. Victor turned so slowly that even the cooks nearest the stove stopped moving. "What did you say?" Emily felt every pair of eyes shift toward her. The sauce continued simmering behind Daniel, releasing a rich aroma that now carried the faint bitterness everyone had finally noticed. Emily swallowed. "The sauce isn't the problem." Victor stepped closer. "Then enlighten us." His voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. Emily looked toward the pan. The reduction was fine when Daniel finished it. The bitterness came after the garnish oil was added. The parsley stems were processed too warm, and the oil carried that bitterness into the sauce. Daniel stared at her. Victor's expression hardened. "You tasted it?" "No." A few cooks exchanged glances. Victor gave a short laugh. "So you diagnosed my sauce from across the kitchen?" Emily hesitated. "I smelled it." That earned the reaction Victor wanted. Someone snickered. Another cook lowered his head to hide a smile. Victor looked around as though Emily had just provided entertainment during an otherwise stressful service. "You smelled it?" "Yes, chef." He folded his arms. "And what exactly would you do?" Emily glanced at Daniel, whose face still carried the shame of being blamed for something he had not caused. "Remake the herb oil cold. Reduce the sauce slightly, correct the acidity, then finish it off heat." Victor's smile disappeared. "You seem remarkably confident for someone hired to wash produce." Emily's cheeks warmed. "I was only trying to help." "Did anyone ask you?" Silence. Emily looked down. "No, chef." "Then perhaps you should remember why you're here." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Chef, she might be right. I wasn't speaking to you." Victor turned back to Emily. She could have stopped there. For 3 weeks, staying invisible had been easy. But then she saw Mason scraping another ruined plate into the trash. She saw Daniel standing beside a sauce he had prepared correctly, taking responsibility for Victor's mistake. Something in her tightened. "The oil was added at the pass," Emily said quietly. Victor froze. He had added it. Everyone knew it. The kitchen became unnaturally still. Victor stepped closer. "Are you correcting me?" "I'm saying Daniel didn't ruin the sauce." That was the moment the disagreement became personal. Victor glanced toward the dining room. Several guests seated near the open kitchen were watching now. His pride had found an audience. "You think you can do better?" Emily met his eyes. "I didn't say that." "No. You just stood in my kitchen and explained my food to me." His voice rose. "So let's make this educational." He swept toward the prep counter and gathered ingredients almost carelessly: a piece of halibut, carrots, onions, potatoes, herbs, butter. Nothing luxurious. Nothing forgiving. He placed them before Emily. "You seem to have opinions." "Cook." Daniel stared at him. "Chef." Victor raised one hand. "No. I want to see this." He looked toward the staff. Several nervous smiles appeared. Then Victor turned back to Emily. "Make something worthy of Bellamy House." Emily looked at the ingredients. Victor leaned closer. "Unless smelling food is easier than cooking it." A laugh escaped from somewhere near the line. Emily heard it. She also heard the murmur spreading beyond the kitchen as nearby diners realized a challenge was unfolding. Victor expected embarrassment. He expected trembling hands, excuses, perhaps tears. Instead, Emily slowly removed her old apron. She washed her hands. Then she tied her blonde hair tighter behind her head. When she looked back at Victor, something in her expression had changed. Not anger. Not fear. Calm. "All right," she said. And for reasons Victor could not yet understand, Daniel stopped feeling sorry for her. He started feeling sorry for Victor. Emily's quiet, "all right," changed the temperature of the kitchen. Victor expected hesitation. Instead, she stepped toward the ingredients as if the laughter behind her had never happened. 20 minutes, he said, glancing toward the dining room. That should be generous enough. Emily checked the halibut. 15. Victor blinked. A few cooks stopped smiling. "Excuse me. 15 minutes is enough." Daniel stared at her. Victor gave a sharp laugh. "Your funeral." Emily said nothing. She reached for the restaurant-issued knife. The moment her fingers closed around the handle, Daniel noticed it again, that strange familiarity he had seen earlier. Only now she wasn't cutting onions. She was working. The first carrot became thin, precise ribbons. The second was divided into perfect pieces almost without measurement. Her knife never slammed against the board. It moved quietly, economically, each motion flowing into the next. One cook leaned forward. Another stopped wiping his station. Victor checked his watch. 14 minutes. Emily ignored him. She placed a pan over heat and listened. Not watched. Listened. When the metal reached the temperature she wanted, she added butter. It foamed, hissed, then slowly turned golden. The halibut followed. A clean crackle filled the kitchen. Emily never touched it again. Victor's smile weakened. Most inexperienced cooks moved food constantly because they were afraid of burning it. Emily waited. Her attention shifted to the vegetables. She built a quick stock from trimmings others would have discarded, crushed herbs between her fingers, then reached for the sauce Victor had rejected. Daniel frowned. "You're using that?" "Part of it." She poured a small amount into another pan. Then she rebuilt it. Cold herb oil. A touch of acidity. Heat lowered at precisely the right moment. Victor stepped closer. Emily tasted once. Only once. Her face revealed nothing. Daniel watched the sauce change from heavy and bitter to glossy and balanced. He dipped the edge of a spoon into it when Victor wasn't looking. His eyes widened. Emily glanced at him. Daniel slowly put the spoon down. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Near the open kitchen, 2 diners had risen slightly from their chairs to watch. The earlier laughter was gone. Now there was only curiosity. Victor noticed. 10 minutes. Emily turned the fish. Its surface was an even, deep gold. Victor's eyes narrowed. That crust was difficult to achieve without overcooking the center. Emily began plating. No tweezers. No unnecessary decoration. Potato first. Vegetables beside it. Halibut placed carefully above them. Then the sauce. 1 controlled spoonful. The aroma moved beyond the pass. At table 12, Margaret Whitmore stopped speaking in the middle of a sentence. Her head turned. She knew that smell. Or thought she did. Emily finished with a few drops of herb oil and stepped back. Done. Victor checked the clock. 12 minutes and 47 seconds. Nobody laughed. He approached the plate. For the first time since issuing the challenge, he examined Emily's work without contempt. Something about the sauce bothered him. Not because it looked wrong. Because it looked familiar. "Pretty," he said finally, recovering his smirk. "But plating isn't cooking." Emily wiped her hands on a towel. "I know." Victor looked toward the guests watching from nearby tables. His pride demanded an ending. He picked up a silver fork. "Then let's find out what our little kitchen expert has made." Emily stepped aside. Daniel held his breath. Margaret Whitmore stared across the room. And as Victor cut through the halibut, Emily's face remained perfectly calm. Because the challenge had never been whether she could cook. The challenge was how long Victor could taste the truth before realizing he had mocked the wrong woman. Victor lowered the fork toward the plate. For the first time since the challenge began, no one in the kitchen was watching Emily. They were watching him. He cut through the halibut. The crust gave way with a delicate crack, revealing a center that was pearly and moist. Victor paused for half a second. He knew immediately that the fish had been cooked correctly. Perfectly, actually. But technique alone wasn't enough. He dragged the piece through the amber sauce. "Last chance," he said, looking at Emily. "Want to tell everyone what you were trying to do?" Emily folded the towel beside her station. "No." Victor raised an eyebrow. "No. You should taste it first." Daniel almost smiled. Victor didn't. He lifted the fork. The bite entered his mouth. And the room seemed to contract around him. First came the browned butter, deep, warm, almost nutty. Then acidity cut through it cleanly. The sweetness of the vegetables appeared underneath, followed by herbs that were bright without becoming bitter. And finally came something Victor hadn't expected. Restraint. Nothing on the plate fought for attention. Nothing begged to impress. Every flavor seemed to know exactly where it belonged. Victor chewed once. Twice. Then stopped. The smirk vanished. Daniel watched his chef's eyes move back toward the plate. Victor swallowed. No one spoke. A server standing near the dining room entrance lowered the tray in her hands. Victor cut another piece. This time, he didn't make a joke. He tasted it more slowly. Emily remained still. "What did you put in the sauce?" Victor asked. "Nothing unusual." "That isn't an answer." Emily met his gaze. "Carrot reduction. Brown butter. The corrected herb oil. A little cider vinegar." Victor frowned. "That's all?" "Yes." It irritated him more than some secret ingredient would have. He understood every component. He simply hadn't imagined combining them that way. Daniel stepped closer to the plate. "Chef." Victor ignored him. From table 12 came the quiet scrape of a chair. Margaret Whitmore had stood. "May I taste that?" Victor turned. The color in his face changed slightly. "Mrs. Whitmore, this was only a staff exercise. I didn't ask what it was." The dining room went still again. Margaret approached the pass with the composed authority of someone accustomed to being heard without raising her voice. Victor forced a smile. "Of course." Emily prepared a small portion. Margaret watched her hands. Not the food. Her hands. Emily placed the plate before her. Margaret took one bite. Her expression changed. She closed her eyes. For several seconds, she seemed to forget the restaurant around her. When she opened them again, she looked directly at Emily. "Who taught you this?" Emily's fingers tightened around the towel. My mother taught me the beginning. The beginning? Emily nodded. Margaret took another bite. No, she whispered. Victor heard her. What is it? Margaret ignored him. Her eyes remained fixed on Emily. I've tasted this balance before. A murmur moved through the nearest tables. Victor stiffened. Margaret studied Emily's face, searching through a memory that seemed suddenly urgent. Then her eyes widened. Carter. Emily said nothing. Margaret stepped closer. Emily Carter. Daniel looked between them. Victor's jaw tightened. Margaret's voice became almost disbelieving. Where have I heard that name before? For the first time since entering Bellamy House, Emily looked uncomfortable. Not because she had failed. Because someone had finally begun to remember. Victor stared at the quiet young woman he had mocked minutes earlier. The challenge was over. But something far more dangerous to his pride had just begun. Margaret Whitmore repeated the name more slowly. Emily Carter. The words seemed to settle over the dining room. Victor gave a nervous laugh. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm sure there are thousands of Carters. Margaret didn't look at him. She was still studying Emily. Emily stood beside the pass, her hands quiet now, the towel folded between them. You cooked somewhere before, Margaret said. It wasn't a question. Emily lowered her eyes. A few places. Daniel almost laughed at the understatement. A few places, he said softly. Emily, you just fixed a sauce Chef Langley couldn't. Daniel. Victor's warning cut through the room. But it came too late. People were listening. Margaret took another bite. This time she tasted the sauce alone. Her eyes narrowed. Then memory arrived. Portland. Emily looked up. Margaret's face changed. 6 years ago. The Young American Culinary Showcase. Victor's fingers tightened around the fork. Several cooks exchanged confused looks. Margaret continued. There was a 19-year-old woman. No famous restaurant behind her. No television contract. She served halibut with browned butter, vegetables, and an apple reduction. Emily remained silent. Margaret stepped closer. You won. A hush fell. Daniel stared at Emily. Victor shook his head. That showcase was invitation only. Yes, Margaret replied. Her voice was calm. I was one of the judges. Victor froze. Margaret looked back at Emily. You disappeared afterward. Emily's expression softened, but sadness passed through it. My mother became ill. The room seemed to lose some of its tension. I went home. And your career? Emily glanced toward the plate. My mother mattered more. No one laughed now. Emily explained only what was necessary. She had spent years learning beside her mother in a small family kitchen before earning places in professional programs. After the showcase, opportunities came quickly, restaurants, apprenticeships, interviews. Then came the phone call. Her mother needed care. Emily left. By the time she was ready to return, the culinary world had moved on. And you came back as support staff? Daniel asked. Emily nodded. I wanted to know if I still loved kitchens when nobody knew my name. That answer struck Victor harder than any boast could have. Because everything he valued, titles, recognition, photographs, applause, was exactly what Emily had chosen to leave outside. A voice came from behind them. Emily. Everyone turned. Thomas Bellamy stood near the dining room entrance. The owner had arrived without anyone noticing. He stared at Emily as though trying to reconcile the young woman in the black apron with an old memory. Then recognition settled across his face. Emily Carter. Victor looked at him. You know her? Thomas walked closer. I tried to hire her 6 years ago. The silence deepened. She turned me down. Daniel's mouth opened. Victor said nothing. Thomas looked at Emily's plate, then at the half-empty dish before Margaret. You cooked this? Emily nodded. Thomas smiled faintly. I thought so. Victor finally found his voice. If she had this background, why didn't she tell anyone? Emily looked at him. There was no triumph in her expression. That was never supposed to matter. Victor frowned. Emily continued quietly. You decided what I could do before you ever asked. No accusation. No anger. That made it worse. Victor looked around. At Daniel. At Margaret. At Thomas. At the cooks who had laughed because he had laughed first. Then at the young woman he had publicly challenged for entertainment. Minutes earlier, Victor had wanted everyone in Bellamy House to watch Emily fail. Now everyone was watching him understand why she hadn't. Thomas Bellamy's words changed everything. I tried to hire her 6 years ago. Victor stood motionless beneath the past lights. Around him, the kitchen that normally responded to his slightest command had become completely still. Thomas picked up a clean fork and tasted what remained on Emily's plate. He chewed slowly. Then he looked at her. You still cook like you listen before you speak. Emily gave the faintest smile. My mother used to say ingredients tell you what they need. I remember. Victor cleared his throat. So she won one showcase. The sentence sounded weak the moment it left him. Thomas turned. No, Victor. She won the showcase after beating 23 professionally trained finalists. Then she completed stages in 3 respected kitchens before she disappeared from the industry. Daniel stared at Emily. You never told me any of this. You never treated me like I needed a resume before speaking to me. Daniel fell silent. Victor looked away. That sentence hadn't been directed at him. It didn't need to be. Margaret returned to her table, but the story had already traveled across the dining room in whispers. Guests glanced toward Emily with new curiosity. Emily noticed. And she looked uncomfortable. Thomas noticed too. You really wanted to come back quietly. Yes. Why here? Emily hesitated. Because my mother brought me here once. Thomas's expression softened. She saved for 3 months for the reservation. I was 17. We sat near the window. She looked toward the far side of the room. She told me a great restaurant wasn't about expensive ingredients. It was about making someone feel that the plate in front of them mattered. Victor's eyes dropped toward Emily's dish. No truffles. No caviar. No gold. Only ordinary ingredients treated with extraordinary attention. My mother died 2 years ago, Emily continued. For a while, I couldn't cook without thinking about hospitals, missed opportunities, everything I'd walked away from. Her voice remained steady. So I stopped. Daniel said nothing. I came here because I wanted to start again without expectations. No awards. No old articles. No one watching to see whether I was still good. She glanced around the dining room. That part didn't exactly work out. A few gentle smiles appeared. Even Margaret laughed softly. Victor did not. He was remembering every moment he had failed to notice. The corrected family meal. The herb oil. The knife work. The sauce. Emily had never hidden her ability. She had simply refused to announce it. And Victor had mistaken quietness for ignorance. Thomas turned toward him. How many times did she show you she understood food before tonight? Victor opened his mouth. Nothing came. Daniel knew the answer. Enough. Thomas didn't humiliate him further. He didn't need to. Victor looked toward the cooks. Some had laughed when he laughed. Now they avoided Emily's eyes. The shame belonged to more than one person. Victor slowly removed the towel from his shoulder. Emily. She faced him. For once, there was no mockery in his voice. I was wrong. The room remained silent. Victor swallowed. I judged your position before I judged your work. Emily studied him. She could have made him suffer. Everyone would have understood. Instead, she simply nodded. Then don't do it to the next person. Victor lowered his eyes. Thomas looked at Emily. There's still a service to finish. Emily reached for her old black apron. Thomas stopped her. No. He crossed to an empty hook near the pass and removed a clean white chef's coat. Then he held it toward her. The embroidered name belonged to no one yet. But everyone understood what the gesture meant. And Victor understood something else. Emily Carter had never needed a title to prove she belonged in that kitchen. The kitchen had needed to become worthy of recognizing her. Thomas held the white chef's coat between them. For several seconds, Emily didn't take it. The dining room remained unusually quiet. Guests who had come expecting an elegant dinner were now watching something no tasting menu could have promised. A young woman being seen differently than she had been an hour earlier. Emily looked at the coat. Then at Thomas. I didn't come here for a title. I know, he said. That's why I'm offering you one. Emily slowly accepted it. No applause erupted. Not yet. The moment felt too delicate for that. She slipped off her black apron and put on the coat. The sleeves were slightly too long, and Daniel smiled as she folded them once at the wrists. Victor watched from beside the pass. For years, that space had belonged to him. Tonight, for the first time, he understood that leadership wasn't proved by making everyone else feel smaller. He stepped toward Emily. I owe you more than an apology. Emily met his eyes. Victor glanced at the staff. I made this kitchen afraid of mistakes. No one moved. And somewhere along the way, I started confusing fear with respect. Daniel lowered his gaze. Victor swallowed. I humiliated you because you questioned me. Then I turned your ability into entertainment because I assumed you couldn't possibly have earned the right to speak. Emily listened without interrupting. Victor looked at the plate that had started everything. I was wrong. Emily nodded once. Then learn from it. No victory speech. No demand that he be fired. No attempt to return humiliation with humiliation. Just 4 words. Victor seemed smaller after hearing them, but perhaps, for the first time that evening, more human. Thomas turned toward the kitchen. We still have guests to feed. A nervous laugh broke the tension. Then another. The room began breathing again. Victor looked toward Emily. Chef Carter. She paused. It was the first time he had called her that. Would you help us finish service? Emily glanced at Daniel. He grinned. Only if you save that sauce. For the first time all night, Emily laughed. She stepped toward the pass. And something subtle changed. Nobody moved because they were afraid of being shouted at. They moved because there was work worth doing. Emily adjusted the next plate instead of criticizing it. She showed Mason how to control the puree rather than throwing his work away. When Daniel asked about the herb oil, she explained instead of guarding the knowledge. Victor watched. He had spent years believing authority meant being the loudest voice in the kitchen. Emily barely raised hers. People listened anyway. Near the end of service, Margaret Whitmore requested one final thing. "Please send my compliments to the chef." The server smiled. "Which chef?" Margaret looked toward the open kitchen. Emily stood beside Daniel, sleeves rolled, concentrating on a plate while Victor quietly listened to her suggestion. Margaret smiled. "You know which one." Later, after the final guests departed, Thomas placed Emily's original black apron on the counter beside the white coat. She looked at both for a long moment. One represented how people had seen her. The other represented what they now knew. But Emily understood something neither piece of clothing could explain. Her worth had never changed. Only their ability to recognize it had. That night, Bellamy House remembered a lesson no award could teach. Talent does not always enter through the front door. Dignity does not announce itself. And sometimes the person everyone overlooks is simply waiting for one fair chance to be seen. Victor had mocked a simple woman's cooking. One bite silenced the restaurant. But what remained after the silence was something far more important. Respect.